Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to make a video today that I've been wanting to make for some time. I actually have the the visuals set up for this already. So basically what I want to do here is I want to pretend like I'm trying to game dev for Season of Discovery, since I actually do a bit of game development on my own game and other games. My wife works in the gaming industry. It is what it is, right? Since clearly, World of Warcraft doesn't seem to have a lot of game testers or game developers, especially on the PvP front. I mean, just look no further than the fact that Ashenvale graveyards for their whole PvP thing are just atrocious. Like, damn, all right, what the hell were you thinking? Okay, so the first where I want to start off here is I want to start off by talking about classic World of Warcraft in general's game philosophy as far as spells are concerned. Now, today I'm going to talk about spells mostly from a PvP perspective. And then later I'll talk about other things, but just game dev in general from a PvP perspective. The next video I make in this series, I'll talk about game development from a PvE perspective, like, good ideas, bad ideas, what they're doing well in Season of Discovery, what they're not doing very well in Season of Discovery. But right now we're just going to talk about spells and PvP. Okay, so classic World of Warcraft is actually extremely consistent with a Jedi-Curve. It's very clear that classic World of Warcraft runs on a number of Jedi-Curves, and these Jedi-Curves are very lovingly and very painfully crafted from a PvP perspective anyways. So for example, spell damage is almost always a 1-to-1 mana ratio, and it never really goes above that. And you compare that to healing spells, which base healing spells and base damage spells. So damaging spells are 1-to-1, but healing spells are 1-to-2. And then the other thing that is very, very consistent is the spell power ratio. So, for example, spells are very rarely more than that's not it. I'm looking for the spell power ratio one. Longer cast time. Spell power ratio is linked to the cast time or has a 6-second or longer CD behind it. Blah 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 blah. The longer the cast time, more spell power ratio, greater mana efficiency. But it's important to... Okay, so I guess I only wrote it down here since this would be the explanation one. Healing spell ratios are about 20 to 30% higher than damage ratios. And this is actually incredibly important. Because the base damage of the spells is 1-to-1 versus 1-to-2, but by the time you get a bunch of spell damage behind the enemy spellcaster and the enemy healer, the fact that the healing ratios are always between 20 to 30% bigger, and they start with a larger base to them, the healing spells will simply do more healing than the spell damage, but not a lot more healing than the spell damage. And this is actually incredibly important, and we're going to talk about it basically down here. So you really have to ask yourself a series of questions. It's like, what is the ideal relationship between spell damage dealers and between healing spells in a video game? Especially from a PvP perspective. And the answer is, well, if you have a healer doing nothing but healing, and you have a spellcaster doing nothing but casting damaging spells, it should be possible for for the damaging player to kill the healer, but it shouldn't be the likely outcome, if that makes any sense. You're probably doing bad game design if it isn't possible for the spell damage dealer to kill the healer, and you're definitely doing bad game design if it is almost impossible for the healer to heal through the spell damage that is incoming, right? You want that nice little middle ground where there's a chance for the spellcaster to kill the healer, but it's not the very likely outcome. And that's exactly what this Jedi-Curve and these mana ratios and these base mana ratios and these spell power ratios end up doing. Why is this? Okay, so for example, by the time you get fully geared in classic World of Warcraft, your damaging spells don't have a 1-to-1 mana efficiency ratio anymore. They have closer to like a 1-to-3 mana efficiency ratio, and the healing spells have like a 1 to 3.5 ratio. Really? So as soon as I start this video, the construction crew above me starts doing their thing again. Awesome. Anyways, I'm just gonna try to finish this out. I'm debating whether I should stop the video or not. Okay, we'll try to finish it out, even though they're knocking drywall up there off, down up there from time to time. Okay, moving on. I can't make videos while having distractions. It just doesn't work. My brain is like, what the hell's that? What the hell's that? What the hell's that? Okay. Right. So at level 60, what ends up happening is the healing spell rate, damaging spells is 1 to 3, like 1 mana for 3 damage, and then the healing spell is like 1 mana for a 3.5 healing. Even from a time healing efficiency perspective, shamans will be chucking lightning bolts at you that can do between 800 and 1800 damage. My bad. Like yeah, it's like 900 and 1800 damage if they crit, and they're doing that every 2 seconds. And you're trying to heal yourself with holy lights, and your holy lights are healing you for like about 2200 every 2.5 seconds. And the game also takes into account that there's a lot of interrupts flying around in PvP, so forth and so on. But very quickly it becomes apparent that if I'm a healer and I'm doing nothing but healing myself, and the damage dealer is doing nothing but throwing spells at me, even with the interrupts existing in the game, it is entirely possible for me to heal through that. Eventually, they will run out of mana, which means there is some end in sight to the heal lock, meaning he's not going to be casting spells forever. I'm not going to be healing myself forever. That is a terrible scenario to be in. Like, if the spell, let's say the healing spells had costed 0 mana, and the damaging spells in Classic World of Warcraft also costed no mana, or the equivalent of that, right? Well, the scenario you would find yourself in is the healer can do nothing but heal themselves, and the spell damage dealer can do nothing but cast spells. Eventually, the spell damage dealer is going to get crit, and the healer is just going to explode. Right, that's the eventual outcome, but that's going to take like 60 seconds, 2 minutes to eventually play out. Bad game design, right? So you want there to be a possibility for the spell damage dealer to kill the healer, but you don't want it to be the likely outcome, and you want an end in sight to a potential heal lock, which the the lack of mana efficiency in general in Classic WoW just ends up being a thing. So, for example, I might find myself heal locked against a shaman casting into me for upwards of like 40 seconds, but if he doesn't kill me, eventually he's going to run out of mana because I'm operating on a 3.5 to 1 mana efficiency ratio. He's operating on a 1 to 3 mana efficiency ratio. So you can see the good game design, and you can see what is causing the good game design. When you look at Season of Discovery, and you start noticing that they are in many cases in utter violation of Classic Rouse spell damage rules, of healing rules, and of the Jedi-Curve in general. That's when things start getting a little bit more retail, just to say the very least. And when I say retail, just think of like really shitty game design where it's like, as a healer, I can never survive against this rogue. I just die. He just does too much damage. I can never survive against this spellcaster. He just does too much damage. Or the inverse. I can never kill this healer because he just heals too much. It's impossible. I'm just wasting my time over here. Bad game design, bad game design, bad game design. You want the spellcaster to clash with the healer. You want him to roll the dice on whether or not he can kill the healer. And if he fails to kill the healer, he basically has to run away. In Classic WoW, spell damage dealer versus a healer is about a 25% chance that the spell damage dealer can get good enough rolls in the crits and good enough interrupts on the healer that the healer just explodes. If the healer has any kind of cooldown issues or is lacking any cooldowns, then it becomes much more of a closer fight. If it's a true healer in Classic World of Warcraft, meaning he's wearing nothing but plus healing gear, at that point he can't do any damage, but dear God, will he not die to anything. That's not entirely true. The plus healing gear is really, really good from a HPS perspective, but it doesn't have a lot of mana. My bad, HP, which is the other way to really balance healers in a game like this, and Classic World of Warcraft actually does this really well. Via the item prioritization. So there's another Jedi-Curve in the game with the item prioritization. The best healing gear in the game, even the best healing game in the gear for PvP, has low HP pools, which means that spellcasters and damage dealers, despite the horrifying amounts of healing, they can actually burst you out of existence. Burst damage is what kills healers primarily in Classic World of Warcraft. You have to shut them up. You have to silence them, stun them, and then kill them in those moments, counterspell them, like stuff like that. If you don't kill them in those moments, then the healing ratios are going to speak for themselves, loud and clear. So it's just all fascinating, good game design. Let me look at the stuff down here to see if I'm missing anything before I really dive into SoD here really fast. All right, a level 60 fully geared talents, healing barely. Okay, we did cover that already. If our healing, if out healing is not possible, then the spell damage class will run out of mana first. Yep, totally seen that. Melee damage versus healing / range damage is balanced mostly around mobility rather than Jedi-Curve. This is absolutely true. This has to do more with the whole burst damage thing. Burst damage also, you want to find from a game design perspective, you want to find that nice little happy middle ground, which is it's possible for the burst damage player to kill the enemy, to kill the other player in a burst. Like, it's 100% possible. They can burst you out of existence 100 to 0. But it's not the most likely outcome, if that makes any sense. And melee, a lot of melee classes, warriors, paladins, well, now druids and handsome shamans and all that kind of stuff. They definitely, in classic WoW historically, they can do enough damage if they high roll on this, if they crit on that, to kill healers and spellcasters in the game, but it's not the most likely outcome. And you've seen this play out in PvP time again, where the mage gets away with like less than 10% life. He gets away with like 2%, 5%, 6%, 7% life. This caster, that healer gets away. They start healing up to full. That's just good game design, because otherwise it's like you wouldn't want to engage on a target, period, ever, if there was like no chance in hell. And we've seen this in retail, right? Where you as a DPS class are beating on a discipline priest, and it's literally you cannot do enough DPS to kill the discipline priest. You could be there for a million years. He can't kill you. You can't kill them. It's just like, what the hell am I doing with my life? Super annoying, super frustrating. You have no chance in hell. Very bad game design. Classic World of Warcraft gets around this by giving melee classes 110,000% all the damage they need to absolutely cut healers to fucking pieces in melee, and then they just tell the melee classes, your one weakness is going to be mobility issues. So because imagine how dead priests are if they don't have fear in Classic World of Warcraft. Imagine how dead basically just about any class is to another melee class if they're not trying to engage them with mobility. You balance melee classes around the fact that they cannot burst the other class out of existence, and they have mobility issues. This is one of the reasons why paladins in Classic World of Warcraft, Reckoning paladins, are, again, so very well designed. They have massive mobility issues. They have issues catching people. They don't have issues running around, but they have issues catching people. And they're one of the classes that have the death touch. Warriors have the death touch, but they're infamous for having a mobility issue. Rogues have the death touch, and they don't have as many mobility issues as the other classes mentioned, and so they're one of the banes, one of the terrors of Classic World of Warcraft, because again, they're following this design philosophy, if that makes any sense. Okay, so spell damage versus healing is balanced in one way. Burst versus other classes is balanced in another way. We'll talk about that in a second. But it's important to realize that melee versus healing and range classes is its own special little thing. And it's balanced around the class has extreme mobility issues, but if they're allowed to sit on you, they definitely will cut you to pieces. There's no there's not really any balance there. If I don't know what my brain is trying to say here. There's not any nuance around it other than that. They do absolutely. I guess that the nuance here would be this. Spell damage dealers in Classic World of Warcraft are not allowed to out DPS melee classes, especially if those melee classes also have mobility issues. This makes complete sense because you can't have range classes who have far less mobility issues in dealing DPS out damage melee classes if you're also giving the melee classes mobility issues. And if you're balancing the melee classes specifically around the fact that they have mobility issues, then also you're going to have to make sure they do tons more damage. Just so it's just otherwise it'll be like League of Legends where range classes just innately have an advantage over melee classes because melee classes have melee issues. So it is what it is. So if they have if they had no mobility issues, then by all means make range DPS and melee DPS roughly similar. But if you're going to give mobility issues to one of them, yeah, well, it doesn't really matter for the range classes, them having mobility issues. Lol. Because they're a damn range class. But yeah, so damage on the melee class has to be scaled up significantly if you're going to have their limitation being mobility. Just game design 101, right? Okay, cool. Now, where the hell do I want to jump over here? I want to jump into talking about classic PvP game design in general, if that makes any sense. So I made an entire video on this subject, but I guess I'm just going to TLDR it here. So there's a term often used in classic World of Warcraft called the chess game, and then the other term that's often spat out is called the dance. When I make my guides, and this is one of my guides right here, you'll notice that I have in the upper corner of both sides major cooldowns to keep track of for each class. As the guide plays out. We're going to talk about that in a second. And you can also see that down here we have the different ranges of things. Things having different ranges, and that being part of the whole classic World of Warcraft a PvP balance philosophy is what causes the dance. Specifically, the philosophy seems to be that there can be no one spell to rule them all kind of a deal. All spells all spells and abilities have a certain power ratio set to them, a certain power level, and more importantly, every spell in the entire
in the open world.
Every spell in the entire game. I'm slamming my hands on the keyboard. I hit the unpause button. Every spell in the entire game has to have a weakness of some kind. It has to have a weakness of some kind. Okay? Being that, does it have a long cooldown behind it? Can you interrupt it? Does it force you to root your ass in place in order to cast this fucking thing? Does it have, is it amazing, but it sucks a lot of mana? What's the range on this damn thing? It has to have a fucking weakness. Okay? It's super important that your spell has a goddamn weakness to it. Or it has a long cooldown, right? Because if you put a spell in the game that has no weakness to it whatsoever, and it is spammable, well, that's the only spell that class is ever going to use, and it becomes incredibly hard for any other class to play around. When we get to SoD and I start talking about Star Surge, I'm going to lose my fucking shit because it has no weakness whatsoever. Zero. It's like some game dev put it in the game just to personally try to piss me off. Or to try to understand what classic WoW would look like if a spell was put in the game that has no weakness whatsoever, and a class could just spam it and kill everybody, and there's not a goddamn thing they can do around it. The dance has to do with the fact that range of spells and abilities is a huge thing. So, for example, there are a lot of very powerful spells in classic World of Warcraft, very powerful abilities, but they have a 20-yard range, but they have a 10-yard range. They don't have a 30-yard range, they don't have a 35-yard range, they don't have a 42 fucking yard range. They might have a 30-yard range, but when they have a 30-yard range, you need to root your ass in place and cast them for a million years, like Pyroblast or Arcane Missiles or something stupid like that, right? Which greatly reduces the range, because if the enemy is running away from you, that 30-yard range spell basically becomes a 20-yard range spell because you're not getting it off in time. If you ever watch two warlocks fight each other, you'll notice that they never fear each other. Why is this? Well, because they have to root themselves in place, cast a 1.5-second spell, and it's a 20-yard range spell when they only have to stay 30 yards away from each other to stay out of fear range. This is the dance. The dance is about the ranges. So if one warlock wants to fear another warlock, he's going to have to throw a grenade, stun the warlock, run up close enough that he can get the fear off, and boom, that's how you would, one warlock would fear another warlock. But that, every time anybody talks about the dance, it entirely has to do with range. Range is a massive balancing component that you need in your toolkit. Super important that you realize that if a spell in the game is overpowered on everything else, it has to have a weakness, and you got to give it at a minimum, give it a range weakness, like dear God. Okay, the other thing to talk about, of course, is the chess game. Now, this is the thing that people really talk about. Again, I made an entire video on the subject. So what happens in classic World of Warcraft is every class has a number of spells and abilities that are rooted into their toolkit, right? I am a mage, therefore I have these abilities. I am a paladin, therefore I have these abilities. But then we also exist in an ocean of crazy engineering items and crazy trinkets and crazy weapon procs and item activatables, and then world consumables like whipper-root tubers and this and that. And there's just all kinds of crazy things that you can use in PvP. However, what you don't know underneath the surface is almost all these things share a cooldown. So, for example, all the potions in the game share a 2-minute cooldown. Everything here, Whipper-Root Tuber, Knight's Dragon Breath, and Major Recombobulator Trinket, they all share a cooldown. All the engineering items share a cooldown with themselves. If I throw a grenade, I can't use a Goblin Sapper or a nade for another minute. If I use a Goblin Sapper, you see it has a 5-minute cooldown here, then I can't use any other engineering item for 5 fucking minutes. So even though there's 50 engineering items I can use, I can only use one every minute, basically. Bandages are on their own separate cooldown. Removing poisons and stuff, also as part of the bandaging thing. You get the idea, right? So this is, in order for a chess game to exist in your game, there has to be moves that players can make, right? So it's more, how do I put this? It's like, I often say the phrase in game design where it's like going from it's going from chess to checkers, or I'm going from playing a game of chess to playing a game of checkers. I felt like that when in retail, going from classic WoW to going to retail is like going from playing chess to playing checkers, and I thought a lot about why this is. And the first thing to observe is that what's causing the chess game to happen is that there's a large depth of items and usages that can be used, but they all have cooldowns with themselves. So it's like making a move on a chessboard, right? So, for example, my class might have 12 different abilities that are a big deal in PvP, and they all have their own cooldowns. On top of that, I have a healing potion. I have Whipper-Root Tubers. I got bandages. I got nades. I've got trinkets that I can use. These are all tools in my toolkit. They're like moves I can make in the game while we're executing the dance. All right, you follow me on this? None of this matters, however, if I just explode, right? So part of the equation for a chess game is, do I have a bunch of different abilities that I can use, that I can trade with my opponent? That's another term that often comes into play. Like, you're trading. So, for example, you might trade 1 or 2 abilities for a healing potion. He might be blasting on you, and you have to use this defensive cooldown or that cooldown. You wanted to use your Goblin Mortar offensively, but dear God, this mage is chunking you so hard that you have to stun him and run away until you can heal yourself. Or re-stealth. You get the idea, right? They're forcing cooldowns out of you, and you're trying to force cooldowns out of them. And eventually you just run out of abilities to use both in your toolkit and in the wider game. They're all on cooldown, and then you die, right? Or an elemental shaman or a pyro mage or a reckoning paladin blows you up out of existence, and there's no chess game at all. That's a game of checkers. That's not even checkers. That's like tic-tac-toe or flip a coin. Congratulations, you fucking died. So part of the chess game is, do we have a bunch of abilities that need to be traded back and forth until somebody dies? And the other part of the chess game is it impossible to explode somebody out of existence before they can counter with the chess game? Are you following me on this? I'm sure you've seen this in PvP tournaments where it's like a warrior. What I'm trying to describe here is this. It'll be like, imagine classic a World of Warcraft a PvP where you couldn't use any of these items whatsoever. You were just limited to your base toolkits. I can already tell you exactly what PvP would look like. Imagine PvP between a mage and a warrior. The mage would slow the warrior. The warrior couldn't do anything about it because he has access to none of the chess game items whatsoever. He just has his base toolkit, and then the mage casts spells at the warrior, and the warrior dies. Like, the end. That's not what you see happen in PvP, though. What you see happen in PvP is you see the chess game starting to form, and you see the dance starting to happen, where the warrior can do this to get out of a slow. He can do that to get out of a snare. He can activate this item and heal himself, like Diamond Flask, and heal himself for, like, 12,000 HP over the course of a minute, which a mage can't really do anything about. He has options. Even when he doesn't have options, he's got all kinds of defensive cooldowns. So it'd be like this class tries to burst on him, and he just heal pots and whipper roots out of it. Like, that's the counter. The point is that, and again, this is just me recapping this video here, is that the chess game starts to form when there's a depth of abilities that can be used. They all have decently long, but not too long cooldowns. And it's not possible to really burst people out of existence. And part of not being able to burst people out of existence is the chess game, if that makes any sense. So, for example, there's only a handful of bursts, of true bursts in classic World of Warcraft that you really need to keep an eye on from a game design perspective, right? These are bursts that the player in question has they can take no chess game action whatsoever to counter. Okay? So, for example, being polymorphed and palm pyro out of existence is a potential bomb. It's not one of the more powerful ones. Because what happens is you come out of the sheep and you're silenced immediately because they have improved counterspell. So you're silenced for 5 seconds. But while you're silenced for 5 seconds, you can still use a major healing potion. You can still use a whipperroot tuber. You can still use a major recombobulate array. You have access to all your trinkets, so you can just goblin mortar them and tell them to shut the fuck up until the silence has worn off, right? So soft CC doesn't really work to counter burst damage in classic World of Warcraft because you have access to the extended chess game abilities. But what it does do is it forces out those major cooldowns so that, like, the next burst or the burst after that will kill them. If that makes any sense. So it's like, yes, you survived this burst, but what did it cost you? It cost you your major healing potion, it cost you a whipperroot, and it cost you a trinket. Or it cost you just a major healing potion and a whipperroot. The next burst is going to cost you your trinkets, and then the one after that, I'm just going to fucking kill you. Like, that's classic WoW. That's part of the dance. That's the chess game. That's the way it's supposed to look like. Elemental shamans, when they grenade you and they annihilate you out of existence. There isn't really any counterplay to that whatsoever, other than do you have PvP trinket? Do you have bubble? Or does your PvP trinket remove stuns? Because a lot of times it doesn't do that in classic WoW. There's not really a counter to that, and even when you do counter that, like PvP trinket, they just get you in the next burst anyways. So being hard CC'd and bursted on is a death sentence, and basically means you can't play the chess game. Rogues are notorious for not letting people play the chess game. They just open on you, they thistle tea, and they annihilate you out of existence, and then there's no dance, there's no chess game, there's no intricacy, it's not even fun. Very, very one-sided affair. Wreck bombs are in the same category. You get wreck bombed on. It comes in the form of like 7.5 seconds of stun. And honestly, the paladin only needs like 0.2 seconds of stun to delete most classes out of existence. Not really a game. So you want to avoid those scenarios in Classic World of Warcraft as much as possible. You want them to exist, but you want basically to avoid them. What I'm basically trying to say here is it's fine for bursting and lots of damage to exist in Classic World of Warcraft, but just know that if it comes off the back of like hard CC, then you're not gonna get the chess game going at all. All burst does if it's not hard CC is it forces out major cooldowns. A lot of Classic World of Warcraft PvP is trading this extensive cooldowns in the dance and in the chess game back and forth until somebody runs out of answers and then dies because they have no answers left. So when you're watching that warrior in PvP who can't quite get at the mage, but for some reason they're not dying. They're not dying because they keep using healing potions, whipperoot tubers, this item, that item. They're staying alive using all manner of crazy gadgets and gizmos. What's happening is as time is going on, the mage is getting further and further ahead in the chess game until the warrior just doesn't have any answers anymore and then dies. So that's basically what causes the chess game. It's a combination of your base abilities and all the craziness in Classic World of Warcraft that aren't as many as you would think, and they all share cooldowns with each other. All right. So now let me pause the video. Let me turn on the VPN, and we'll go talk about Season of Discovery here for a second. Holy fuck. Because Season of Discovery gets some things right and some things wrong, and I find it very fascinating what exactly is going on there from a game design perspective. Anyways, let me pause the video. All right, cool. So we got it open. Let's go to a talent calculator. Let's go to we're gonna eventually talk about Druid. Let's talk about Druid really fast here. Okay, cool. Since this is one of the most egregious examples in the entire game. All right, so let's talk about areas where Blizzard is currently screwing up in Season of Discovery. So they're screwing up basically every Jedi-Curve that can possibly mess up in Season of Discovery. So, for example, we have spells that in the game that have higher mana efficiency than the classic WoW Jedi-Curve would suggest that they have. They have higher spell power ratios than any healing spell in the game. They have no weaknesses whatsoever. They're instant castable. It's just nuts. Some of the bigger offenders are Priest Penance. We'll talk about. Priest Penance is a big offender. Lava Surge is a big offender, although she does have some weaknesses. Penance definitely has weaknesses. And that's important, right? So in Classic World of Warcraft, if you have a spell, it has to have a weakness. It can, in some way, shape, or form. Does it cost a lot of mana? Is it short ranged? Does it have a long cooldown timer? Do you have to root your ass in place to cast the damn thing? Does it have a bad spell power ratio behind it? Does it do very little damage, but it has a lot of spell power ratio behind it? The spell has to have a fucking weakness. Otherwise, it's not Classic World of Warcraft. And then they decided to give Druids fucking Star Surge. Where the hell are you at? This piece of shit right here. Okay, so in Classic World of Warcraft, this thing has a 42-yard range, which means it outranges everything with the exception of, I do believe, Hunter, Talent Spec, auto shot attacks, which is fucking insane. It has it's instant cast, okay, 42-yard range, It does 200 base damage currently at level, and it has a 100% spell power ratio behind it. Okay, so it has way more spell power ratio behind it than any healing spell. So if you don't know, in Classic World of Warcraft, instant cast spells are never above a 50% spell power ratio. This thing has a 100% spell power ratio behind it, which is like, wait, what? Healing spells, by contrast, even hard-casted healing spells have a 70% spell power ratio. Hard-casted offensive spells have maybe a 60% spell power ratio. Again, there's that whole the healing spell's spell power ratio will be higher than the offense spell power ratio at all times. Star Surge is in complete and utter fucking violation of this. Its base mana cost is 4. I think it is a bug, technically, because she starts at 4 mana, and when you pick her up, and she doesn't stop being 4 mana at max level, which is fucking insane. This means that the spell power rate, the base spell power efficiency of this fucking spell is like 50 to 1. Excuse me? Most spells are not supposed to exceed 1 to 1 in Classic World of Warcraft. This thing is 50 to 1. Get fucking bent. Okay, cool. It has a 100% spell power ratio on an instant cast, which is twice the spell power ratio that it should have in Classic World of Warcraft, which only synergizes with the fact that eventually it's going to be like 1,000 to 1 spell power ratio or mana efficiency ratio, which is absolutely fucking insane. I'm bringing up Star Surge because it's like, in every way you could possibly fuck up a spell in Classic World of Warcraft, Star Surge fucks up a spell in Classic World of Warcraft. So she is the poster boy for what the fuck are you doing? This should not belong in Classic World of Warcraft. Her only weakness is that she has a 6-second cooldown. But 42-yard range, instant... Oh, yeah, and I forgot. She's also a spell that has a 100% critical strike chance. Or not critical strike chance, 100% critical strike damage bonus. So most spells in Classic World of Warcraft, unless specifically talented, and that's not even true, all spells in Classic World of Warcraft, unless specifically talented, have a only gain a 50% damage ratio. This thing just magically comes with a 100% critical strike damage ratio. Like, what the fuck? You literally, the only way to improve this thing and make it better in Classic World of Warcraft would be if it had no cooldown whatsoever. That's the only fucking way to make this spell better. So this spell is in atrocious, horrific, terrifying, go fuck yourself levels of violation of Classic World of Warcraft balance curve. It's literally insane. Whoever wrote this, please fire them. Or fix the coding and tell me that it's actually supposed to cost more mana. Because, dear God. Alright, cool. So, let's talk Shaman. Alright, Lava Burst. Then we'll talk Penance, just by way of example here. Where is Lava Burst? Yeah, Lava Burst. Okay. Lava Burst is overpowered as all fuck and has insane spell power ratio, mana efficiency ratio behind it. She is, just like Star Surge, she is an extremely efficient spell for what she does. She is in violation of Classic World of Warcraft game balance and Jedi-Curve in her mana efficiency and the amount of damage she does per second. In many, many ways, she is in violation of the Jedi-Curve. But she has weaknesses, and this is in line with Classic World of Warcraft game design. You cannot put an ability in the game that has no weaknesses whatsoever. For example, if Star Surge had no cooldown to it whatsoever, and you just get 1 Star Surge every 1.5 seconds, Druids would never use any other spell besides Star Surge, right? Because there's no weakness to it whatsoever. In PvP, in PvE, there's just no weakness to it whatsoever. Lava Burst has weaknesses. She's a hard-casted spell. At 1.5 seconds, she does way more damage than she should for a 1.5 second cast spell. Her spell power ratio is way fucking higher than it should be for Classic World of Warcraft. Her base damage is also way high, but she has a 6-second cooldown. So in a lot of ways, she has similar weaknesses to like Chain Lightning. Chain Lightning's primary weakness is that it has a 6-second cooldown, and you have to root yourself in place, and it costs a shit ton of mana. Those are the 3 main weaknesses for Chain Lightning. Other than that, Chain Lightning doesn't actually have a weakness. She's relatively mana efficient as far as her mana to damage ratio is concerned. Not the greatest efficiency in the world. She's not 3 to 1, but she's definitely like 2 to 1 or better. She's quite a ways up there. It has a 6-second cooldown. So it's not the worst thing in the world. That Lava Burst is not the worst thing in the world. It's cancer, but it's kind of still it's in the ballpark of classic World of Warcraft game design. She would be much better, well balanced if she was a 20-yard range spell rather than a 30-yard range spell. Believe it or not. That way, classes that cannot remove the flame shock or cleanse it and deal with lava burst that way could at least deal with lava burst from a dancing perspective, which shamans wouldn't care about because they would just cast lightning bolts and chain lightnings at you and stuff. So if I wanted to nerf lava burst in any way, shape, or form, I would make it like a 20 or a 25-yard range. That way it's at least danceable. But as it stands now, shamans are going to lava burst you, chain lightning you, lava burst you, chain lightning you, lava. Oh, look, you fucking died. And they're going to do that at like 30 plus yards. Kind of scary stuff. But again, I'm happy to see it has weaknesses. At least in Classic World of Warcraft, this thing has weaknesses. It's not an insane mana efficiency ratio, even though it is a little bit cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs. It's okay for that to exist in Classic World of Warcraft. It's not Star Surge. It's not Star Surge levels of bad. Then we have Penance. People bitch a lot about Penance. Penance is actually pretty well designed in Classic World of Warcraft. Void Plague is not well designed right now. She's doing way too much damage for her mana cost. To be perfectly honest, she does like 3 times more damage than Power Word, not Power Word Death, Shadow Word Pain. Shadow Word Pain has always been one of the most damage to mana efficient spells in all of Classic World of Warcraft. Her weakness, of course, is that she's a dot. So it's not spammable, right? Something being a dot, so dots usually have far better damage to mana efficiency than any other spell than spells in the game. They have really good what's the term? Spell power ratios behind them, but because they're quote unquote dots, they're not spammable, which basically makes them have a very long cooldown behind them, and that's their weakness. Right? Instant castable, but not spammable. Efficient in every other way, not spammable. That is their weakness. So that's in line with classic WoW game design. Let's talk Penance here for a second. She has a 12-second cooldown. So right now I can already tell you she's not overpowered. Right? The sheer act of you telling me this thing has a 12-second cooldown just tells me automatically in classic WoW it's not overpowered. Right? Okay, hold the phone, timeout. No matter what this thing is, it's not overpowered. Because anybody and their dog in Classic World of Warcraft can die inside of 12 seconds. You can be 100 to 0'd within 12 seconds, no fucking problem, by many a class in Classic World of Warcraft. So just there alone, not overpowered. If Star Surge was a 12-second cast, and it was like 0 mana cost, wouldn't matter. 12-second cast, not overpowered. So right then and there, she's not overpowered. She is a root yourself in place ability, so it's not instant cast, thank God. She's also a channel, which means she can suffer pushback issues, I do believe, and she can be interrupted, right? So this thing has a lot of weaknesses. There's a lot of counterplay in Classic World of Warcraft to this. Her great strength is that for a healing spell, she doesn't belong in Classic World of Warcraft. What the fuck did you do to my game, Blizzard? She costs like 70 mana on a 12-second cooldown, and at current level, she heals for like 600. To give you an idea of how terrifying that actually is, in the amount of, a priest could be and in the amount of time it would take him to cast a penance to another penance, he would actually regenerate enough healing or mana from spirit regeneration alone to be able to cast another penance. Meaning that even an priest can cast penance on cooldown until they fucking die. Till the end of fucking time, like Jesus Christ. And this thing has insane mana efficiency. Absolutely nuts. But she's not overpowered and not broken because at least she has weaknesses. Things in Classic World of Warcraft are allowed to be broken as long as they have weaknesses, right? So I'm not complaining about Penance because she has weaknesses, therefore she has counterplay. I'm not complaining about Lava Burst because she has weaknesses, therefore she has counterplay. I think Lava Burst should be a 25-yard range or a 20-yard range spell to increase the weakness of that ability somewhat. Or you could make it so that it does less damage past 20 yards. That might be a better way of doing it, actually, from a game design perspective, where it's like she does a half damage past 20 yards, which would still make it incredibly viable and incredibly useful of a spell to cast, just because it's so insanely mana efficient at 1.5-second cast. Okay, cool. So there's a lot of abilities in Classic World of Warcraft that are not badly designed. Believe it or not. I haven't found anything in the game other than Star Surge that is just in utter fucking violation of Classic WoW game design, to the point where I feel like whoever wrote it is on crack, or just doesn't play Classic WoW in general, or it's bugged and it really should cost even at 100 mana, Star Surge would have like a 2-to-1 mana efficiency ratio, instant cast, 42-yard range. Even then, it would still be absolutely fucking insane. But the fact that it costs 4 mana is just nuts. So the way to fix Star Surge is increase its mana cost, increase its cooldown, which you probably wouldn't want to do because it affects PvE. The whole reason why Star Surge is the way that it is for PvE, I imagine. Or reduce its range. There's no reason for a spell to be 42 fucking yards in PvE. When a spell is 42 fucking yards, what you're telling me on no uncertain terms as one game designer to another is this is for PvP. Because in PvE, 20 yards is more than enough to get the job done. You don't have to be that fucking close. 30 yards at most. 25 yards is perfectly fine. Like Jesus, when you tell me it's 42 fucking yards, okay, that's just fucking stupid. Like, that's like, why? So reduce the range, increase the mana cost is fine. Personally, if it was me, I would give it, I would not only increase the mana cost, so it'd be closer to like 50 mana. I would give it, I would keep everything the same, make it cost 50 mana. But I would give it the same issue in its cast as Mage and Arcane Blast, right? Where every time I use this thing within a certain time period, like let's say its mana cost increases. Its mana cost basically doubles. So it'll be like, it'll go from 50 mana to 100 mana to 200 mana to 400 mana until you stop spamming this fucking thing for at least 12 seconds or something like that. That would be, it needs a weakness. Like, it needs some kind of a weakness. If we want to keep it exactly the fucking way that it is, with no changes whatsoever, because we desperately need this increased damage in PvE for whatever reason, then for the love of God, make this thing like 25 or 20-yard range. 25 probably being ideal because that's a warrior charge range. Yeah. This as it stands, this thing is an abomination to Classic World of Warcraft game design. You'll notice I'm not complaining about the damage. You'll notice I'm not complaining about the cooldown timer. It could have no cooldown timer. It would be perfectly fine. What's really doing it is the fact that there's no counterplay here. This thing has no weakness. It has no weakness. It has no weakness, and that's the problem, right? Again, it's okay if overpowered abilities exist in the game. Just give them some kind of a weakness so that the PvP or player base can play around it in some way, shape, or form. We can engage it with the chess game. We can engage it with the dance. We can do something. But when it's 42 fucking yards away, costs no goddamn mana, is practically fucking spammable, does all the fucking damage that you would need in the world, at some point it's just like, what the fuck? Alright, so the last thing to mention on the PvP side of things that comes to mind is I guess there's a couple other things to mention I probably should talk about in sequence. How long is this video? Yeah, we're closing on an hour. It is what it is. So other things to talk about in sequence that come to my mind are GCD usage, right? Season of Discovery is very rapidly approaching a game design issue where you're going to take classic World of Warcraft and you're going to turn it into League of Legends. What do I mean by this? Well, virtually all the runes in Season of Discovery are they do far more damage. They're basically all of the runes are in violation of classic WoW game design. They do way more damage. They do way more damage, and they're far more mana efficient, and they're far more GCD efficient. Okay, they have all three of that going for them. The last thing you ever want to do in a game like that, in an environment like that, if you're putting in new abilities like this, is to have them be on a short cooldown timer. Why is this a bad idea? Okay, because eventually you're going to run into League of Legends, where basically, as a player, I can only ever use, in Classic WoW, I can only ever use 4 GCDs in a 6-second time period. If they gave me 1,000,000 runes in Classic, in Season of Discovery, it doesn't matter because I can only use 4 of them at a time, in a given window. I can only use 4 of them every 6 seconds, right? Just like League of Legends, basically. I have 4 abilities. I can use them. So, for example, if a druid if a druid had 4 abilities that were all the equivalent of Star Surge, it wouldn't matter whatever abilities else he had in the game. His classic WoW toolkit doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if there's 1,000,000 other runes. He's just going to use Star Surge on every GCD until the end of time. And congratulations, you're now playing a League of Legends. You're not playing classic World of Warcraft. So if they screw up the game design in this area, I will be very, very unhappy with Blizzard, because the more inclined and the more importantly, not the more able we are to use the runes, and the more inclined we are to use the runes for every single GCD, the less you're going to be playing classic WoW, and the more you're going to be playing basically SoD League of Legends, right? It's like, why cast look at Shaman, for example, right? So Shamans can build themselves so that eventually they can, in a 6-second time period, they can do 2 shocks, right? Because their Earth Shock is on a separate cooldown. They have to be in melee to do this, but just follow me here real fast, right? So if they're in melee with you, they can Frost Shock you, they can Earth Shock you, they can cast a Chain Lightning, and then they can cast a Lava Burst. And then congratulations, all 4 GCDs within 6 seconds are being used. Therefore, are they going to use any other GCD whatsoever? No, probably not, because all of those are insanely mana efficient and or damage efficient and or instant cast, right? Like damn. Now there are some weaknesses there, right? Because they have to be in melee with their target in order to do that. And then 2 of those spells are hard casts. But you're not seeing lightning bolts anymore. You're not seeing fire nova totems. You're not seeing any other real part of their toolkit. Purges aren't being added in there, because why purge when you can just do shit tons of damage? Because the damage coming from the lava burst or the earth shock or chain lightning or whatever does more damage than purging that bubble shield or that hot off of the target. You might as well just cast damage. So very quickly you'll find yourself so saturated in GCDs with the runes that there aren't any other spells that are even worth using. Which would be terrible, 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 awful, no good game design. Star Surge is very close to that. If Star Surge, again, had no GCD whatsoever, it would be just like, oh, all I ever do is press Star Surge and people die. I'm DPSing a raid. I guess I'm just pressing Star Surge. Yeah, so bad game design there. So again, Penance is decent game design because she's on a 12-second cooldown. The moment I hear it on 12-second cooldown, I'm like, that's beautiful game design for classic World of Warcraft, because it means that you can't rely on it to just do its fucking, to just carry the day. You're going to have to dig into your less mana efficient classic WoW toolkit. You're going to have to dig into your other abilities. Things are on pretty long cooldowns in classic World of Warcraft in general. yeah, Lava Burst on a 6-second cooldown. She's getting a little, but she's also in a GCD saturated environment. Earth Shock's on a 5-second cooldown. Chain Lightning's on a 6-second cooldown. It's getting real League of Legends feeling already with Elemental Shaman. You get the idea. All right, so the last thing to talk about is the whole bursting thing. So I started this video by talking about the importance of, we don't want this. I started this video talking about the importance of, what is it? People not being bursted out of existence so they actually get to play the fucking chess game. There's a chess game in PvP in Classic World of Warcraft, and if people are getting deleted out of existence, you can't play the chess game, and congratulations, we're back to playing fucking League of Legends. We're playing checkers, not chess. We fucked up in our game design so bad that it doesn't matter that there's all this PvP depth behind the scenes. People are just getting blown the fuck up. Congratulations. Oh, thank you. That's what we need at the end of the video. That's what we need after an hour-long video, is just construction. All right, so I'll try to finish my thought here with the damn construction. So it is extremely probable in Season of Discovery that damage will get out of control to the point where the chess game just doesn't exist anymore because people are getting blown up out of existence. This is not fun. We're going to be playing, it's not even League of Legends at that point. It's basically like you're playing Counter-Strike or some shit, where blink and people are dead. Terrible game design. I thought a lot about how to fix this, and then not to screw over PvE on their side of things. The best thing to do that I can possibly think of is to put runes in the game, and I do mean this plural, that cause the player to take less damage from PvP. Not in PvP, it's just from PvP. So the runes will say, like, enemy players do 20% less damage. Now, it would be very easy for Blizzard to put a rune in the game that is just like, oh yeah, this is your PvP rune. This is your PvP rune slot. It'd be like, 33% reduced damage from enemy players, 50% reduced damage from enemy players, and just have one rune and then to dust their hands of it. I think that would be a terrible waste of game design space. You're far better off allowing just about to greatly reduce that number and to have that such a PvP focused rune to be available for every single rune slot. So, for example, let's say eventually in the game, right now we have 3 rune slots. Let's say eventually in the game we get up to 5 rune slots, like God forbid, right? If in every single one of those rune slots, I could take a rune that said something stupid, like minus 20% damage from enemy players, right? It becomes very nebulous how, like, I know as a PvPer I need to take those. And I know as a PvPer that I need to take more than one of those. But then the question becomes, how many of them do I need, and how many of them can I get away with? And what this really does is it causes some interesting gearing design choices in your builds that are very nebulous and it'll be very hard to figure out. Because again, if it was just this rune slot, minus 50% damage reduction, it would just be like, oh, if I'm PvP or I take this rune, like no brainer. There's no interesting a talent choice there, or game design. There's nothing interesting to suss out there whatsoever. But if you make them take multiple runes, and they all have diminishing returns with each other, it gets far more nebulous how many of them they want to take, and then where exactly they want to take them, which would be I think it's much better game design. It also, you will run into this also those runes get to be used as a kind of anti-League of Legends rune system, especially if the numbers are low. So it's like a minus 10% or a minus 50% or a minus 12% damage from players, right? Because what ends up happening is the more of those runes you force the PvPers to take, the damage reduction runes you force the PvPers to take, the more and more reliant they are going to be on their classic WoW spells and abilities. You're going to get away from the League of Legends problem, because it'll be like, yeah, in PvE, you're not going to want to take any of these runes; they're absolutely useless. There might be a League of Legends problem, but that's not that big of a deal, because in classic World of Warcraft, or in World of Warcraft in general, we just call that a DPS rotation, right? A DPS rotation basically is you playing League of Legends. But in PvP, yeah, if you're forcing them to take three of their 5 runes are these damage reduction runes, and only 2 of their abilities are rune abilities now, very, very, very likely they're going to have to dig quite deep into their classic WoW toolkit to fill out their PvP rotation, which means now suddenly it's okay for the runes in Season of Discovery to have horrifyingly good mana efficiency ratios, to have really powerful what's it called, spell power ratios behind them. It's okay for them to be a little bit broken and a little bit busted, because when it turns around over to PvP, you're not going to be able to have 4 of those abilities or 5 of those abilities that you're using constantly on rotation, because you're going to be missing something stupid like a 50% damage reduction. So the actual PvPers are just going to murder the crap out of you. So personally, that's how I think it should be balanced, is that you should give... I would really want to see every single rune slot in Season of Discovery have a rune that you can take that basically just reduce damage from enemy players. And I would also like to see it so that classes that can heal themselves... Damn it, I hate the construction. Classes that can heal themselves have a greater damage, or a lesser damage reduction than classes that can't heal themselves. So, for example, for me as a paladin, my rune might say I take 10% less damage from players in PvP, and I can take up to 5 of them in different rune slots, right? But for rogues, for warriors, for what's the other one that can't heal themselves in combat? Hunters. It would say like 12.5, or it would say like 13% or 14% damage reduction in PvP, because they can't heal themselves. Because one of the side effects of giving the healing classes damage reduction is that they become really hard to kill, and we already talked about we want that sweet spot of balance where it's like, yes, you can potentially kill them, but the more likely result is that they will survive this nonsense, and you will eventually run out of mana. So that's how I think the future should be balanced. I also like the fact that when we split the runes over different rune slots, it also causes them to have diminishing returns to them. It's not enough of a diminishing return that you wouldn't want to take. More of them, the merrier. I also think it's far more nebulous of a... the waters are a lot more murky with what gear do I wear, what runes do I take, what abilities do I use, like what is the best build for my PvP spec, as opposed to, oh, here's the PvP rune to fix all of the damage issues. It's a 40% damage reduction. Feel free to pick 4 runes and this 1 rune over here for a 40% damage reduction. That's what makes you a PvPer. No, thank you. Definitely spread them over the rune slots. So anyways, this ends the first video in this series. Those are my thoughts on the subject so far, but from the PvP side of things. From the PvE side of things, which will be the next video I do in this series that I'm basically starting, I'm going to talk about PvE as if the PvP implementations have been implemented, because otherwise shit gets terrifyingly imbalanced one way or the other, right? So, for example, let's say a class does dog shit DPS in raids for whatever reason. She's overpowered as fuck in PvP, but in PvE she sucks balls. If your solution to this problem as a game designer is let's just double their fucking damage in PvE, and you have no consideration whatsoever as to what the hell that's going to do to them in PvP, you're basically lighting PvP on fire in exchange for, like, bringing 1 of 9 fucking classes, possibly even 1 spec of what is that, like 27 specs in the entire game, up to par so that some people can, most people, I suppose, can feel good about playing in PvE. There are so many better solutions to the fucking problem than to just do it that simply and that stupidly. It drives me insane when I see stuff like that. So, for example, you could, yeah, okay. So, for example, you can just change the stat figures of spells in raids. So, for example, if you want Star Surge to be a non-existent mana cost in raids, but you want it to be mana have an extensive mana cost in PvP, you just make it so that, well, in open world it has a hefty mana cost behind it, but once you step into a raid, its mana cost gets reduced down to like 10% of what it is normal. Like, very easy solution. You could do other stupid solutions where it's like, here's here's mana oil specifically for raids that gives druids, like, 500 MP5 for some stupid reason, because we want to keep them balanced in PvP. So we had to increase their mana cost of their stupid stuff like that. Far easier would it be? There was one other solution that was by far the best solution. I always like to keep the best for last. Yeah, lighting PvE on fire, or PvP on fire. Yeah, so they could have consumables that only work in raids, where it's like increase the damage of this spell or increase the damage of that spell by 20%, by 30%, by 40%, by whatever the fuck you need it to go up. But when they just snap their fingers and they decide that this Void Plague comes to mind, when they just snap their fingers and decide that priests need to do more damage, therefore we're going to increase the Void Plague damage by 200 fucking %. And it's just like, okay, are we sure we're not lighting PvP on fire? Like, because that's extreme potential. So at the very least, you need to grant some design space for you as a game designer to at least avoid lighting PvP on fire when you're trying to tweak things in PvE. That design space does exist. Some of that design space, of course, can be the damage reduction runes for the PvPers. If they can't help themselves, eventually the damage reduction runes might say incredibly stupid things like minus 30%, and you can take up to 5 of the damn things. Yeah, that might be terrifying, one way or the other. All right. Anyways, I'm in a video here, and Deus Vult boys. So yeah, so PVE is what I'm trying to say about PVE is that it's a lot more. It's a lot easier to solve PvE problems than it is to solve PvP problems if you're willing to put in some kind of a barrier between the two, if that makes any sense. Where it's like, this spell is modified when you enter a raid, but when you're in an open world, it doesn't do as much damage. Or, here's a really good idea. You could just have the spell say something stupid like, does half damage to enemy players. Like, literally write in the spell's code, does half damage to enemy players. It's like, yeah, Star Surge, overpowered as fuck, has all these abilities, yada yada yada, does half damage to enemy players. Cool, done, dusted, wash my hands of it. Awesome, perfect, good game design. Anyways, I'm over here, and Deus Vult boys.